Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. You know the setup. 10 long years have completely burned away in the ashes of the Trojan War, and while the rest of the surviving Greek heroes have packed up and essentially gone back to their lives, one man, a king, a legendary warrior, and honestly a true master of minds, remains completely lost to the churning fury of the sea. This is the epic journey of Odysseus. So for a whole decade after the war, Odysseus is detained on this distant, sun-drenched island by the nymph Calypso, and she offers him the ultimate prize, right? Immortality. He could literally live forever like a god if he just stays with her. But he turns it down. He rejects immortality purely for this incredibly powerful concept known as nostos, which is this fierce, unbreakable longing to go home. Because to a guy whose soul absolutely aches for his own mortal life, well, living forever means absolutely nothing if it means living in exile.
Which brings us to Section 1, 10 Years Lost.
Now just think about the staggering scale of his absence for a second. Year 0, he leaves his family. Year 10, the war finally ends. But by year 20, he is still lost. I mean, think about the psychological toll of that final decade. That is 20 agonizing years of waiting that his family has to endure, slowly losing a little more hope with every single passing season. Because back home in Ithaca, the situation has turned completely toxic. Presumed dead, Odysseus's palace has been entirely overrun. And we aren't just talking about a couple of unwanted house guests here. This is a ruthless mob of suitors. They're actively consuming his wealth, drinking all his wine, and aggressively demanding that his faithful wife Penelope choose a new king from among them. And standing against this massive hostile crowd is only his young son, Telemachus, a kid who is desperate to protect the legacy of a father he barely even remembers. Let's move to Section 2, Gods, Monsters, and Wits. With the gods completely divided on his fate, Odysseus breaks free on a makeshift raft, plunging headfirst into this massive cosmic tug-of-war. On one side you have Poseidon, the god of the sea, whose wrath basically turns this voyage into a waking nightmare. But on the other side is Athena, the goddess of wisdom, and she is fighting fiercely in his corner. And this dynamic is absolutely crucial. Muscle alone is simply not going to beat the ocean. Odysseus has to rely entirely on Athena's domain, his legendary intellect and strategy.
And that cunning intellect is perfectly demonstrated when he's trapped in a dark cavern with Polyphemus, a flesh-eating, one-eyed Cyclops. Facing certain death, Odysseus matches wits with the giant and brilliantly introduces himself as nobody. So later, when Odysseus drives a burning stake into the monster's eye, the Cyclops screams out to his brethren for help, yelling, "Nobody is killing me!" And naturally, the other giants just ignore him. It's an absolute masterclass in quick thinking, even if it totally seals his doom with Poseidon, who just so happens to be the Cyclops' father.
From there, his path reads like a literal survival manual for a nightmare. They face the intoxicating, mind-erasing trap of the Lotus Eaters. Then, the sorcery of Circe, who turns men into literal beasts. There's a grim descent into the Underworld just to seek prophecies from the dead. After that, he's tied tightly to the mast to endure the maddening song of the Sirens. And finally, he has to thread the needle between Scylla, a multi-headed terror, and Charybdis, this roaring ocean abyss. It's an unyielding obstacle course, and he's losing brave comrades at every single turn.
On to Section 3, The Beggar Returns.
Shipwrecked, battered, and completely stripped of his men and his ships, Odysseus finally washes ashore in Ithaca. But after 20 years, he doesn't get some grand hero's welcome. Instead, disguised as a ragged, filthy beggar, he walks straight into his own palace, completely unrecognized. And this lets him witness the shocking insolence of the men who have stolen his life firsthand. He just watches them eat his food and insult his name. The tension at this point in the story is absolutely electric.
Then finally comes the reckoning. Penelope, who, let's be real, is every bit as brilliant and steadfast as her husband, sets a seemingly impossible challenge for the suitors to choose a winner. They have to string Odysseus's massive, legendary battle bow and shoot a single arrow clean through the tiny rings of exactly 12 iron axes lined up in a row. The whole thing is a brilliant setup. These arrogant suitors step up one by one, fully expecting an easy victory. But they try, and they fail. Not a single one of these usurpers is strong enough to even bend the rigid wood of the king's bow, let alone string the thing. And then, the quiet, ragged beggar steps forward from the shadows. The whole room laughs at him. Then, he takes the weapon, and he strings it with effortless grace. And that brings us to our final section, Vengeance and Peace.
The arrow sings through the air, piercing every single one of those 12 axe heads perfectly. The beggar's disguise drops. In a heartbeat, the wandering king is back, aided by his son Telemachus, who is finally fighting alongside the father he has longed for. Odysseus turns his weapon upon the usurpers. It is swift, decisive justice. Blood reclaims the palace floor as he takes out the men who tried to tear his entire family apart.
With the invaders defeated, order is at last restored to a kingdom that was really only held together by a thread. And of course, by 20 years of unyielding loyalty from Penelope. The journey reaches its profound conclusion. Standing there beneath the stars with his wife at last, the wandering king finds his peace. The monsters are finally behind him. The roaring sea has fallen silent, and the long dark voyage is completely over.
We've traced an incredible path of monsters, angry gods, and a whole lot of blood today. But at its core, this isn't just some story about ancient magic, is it? It's a testament to the staggering human resilience required to simply make it back home. Looking at Odysseus and Penelope, it leaves us with a pretty powerful question to end this explainer on. When you are faced with your own ocean of obstacles, what is the nostos, that fierce, unbreakable longing that keeps you moving forward? Keep that in mind for your own journey. Thanks so much for joining me today.